I had always believed that birthdays were meant to be a joyful celebration, a time when the world seemed to shine just a little brighter and every moment was filled with the warmth of laughter and love. But on my 40th birthday, everything I thought I knew about celebration was shattered by the cold sting of betrayal. I remember that night vividly. The restaurant was packed with friends and family gathered to honor what should have been a milestone of my life. A night illuminated by the soft flicker of candles on my cake and the clinking of glasses filled with champagne. A scene that normally would have filled my heart with gratitude and happiness. I sat at the head of the table, smiling as I took in the sight of those I loved, and I felt a sense of anticipation that tonight would be special, that each moment was designed to remind me of the significance of my journey through life. Then, as if the universe itself had decided to cruelly twist that joy into something unrecognizable, my wife, Sophia, suddenly stood up from her seat. I had no inkling of what was coming as her voice, brimming with false excitement, rang out, "I have an announcement." I expected her to deliver a heartfelt toast, maybe share some reflective words or a surprise that would elevate the moment, but nothing could have prepared me for what she said next. In a voice so deliberately detached and mocking that it felt like a death sentence, she declared, "Tonight is a new beginning for me and Daniel." At first, the words seemed surreal, a cruel joke, a miscommunication, but then I noticed Daniel, my best friend who had always been by my side, was seated right beside her. His shifting, nervous glances betrayed an unspoken secret, and I could hardly believe what I was hearing. Sophia continued in a tone that dripped with derision as she proclaimed that she was leaving me, that she had fallen in love with Daniel, and that our marriage was over. In that instant, the room erupted. Not in shocked silence, but in laughter and cheers. Toasts were raised not for my honor, but in celebration of my public humiliation. I could feel the tension radiating from my father, who sat stiffly beside me, while my mother gasped in disbelief. My sister, Rachel, clutched my hand beneath the table, her grip tight with a mix of rage and sorrow, as if silently vowing that justice would eventually be served. The laughter of those around me stung with the harsh reality that the entire room was no longer on my side. Every face that I once trusted now looked upon me as if I were the villain in this twisted play. Even Daniel, with the audacity to smirk and urge me to say something, only deepened the betrayal I felt. For he was not only my friend but now also the man who had stolen what was mine. In that moment, as I felt every ounce of humiliation pressed down upon me, I rose to my feet, adjusting my tie with a calm precision that belied the fury churning inside. I scanned the room, locking eyes with every single traitor who had joined in the mockery, and a slow, cold smile spread across my face, a smile that promised retribution and hinted at a fate they had not foreseen. "You'll regret this," I said quietly, each word resonating like a challenge in the heavy silence that followed. Without waiting for a reaction, I turned and walked out of the restaurant, leaving behind a stunned silence that was as thick as the cheers of betrayal echoing behind me. I walked out into the cool night air with my head held high, every step measured and deliberate, knowing that they had no idea what was coming next. In that exodus, I was not defeated. Rather, I was merely biding my time, preparing to transform their fleeting moment of triumph into a downfall of epic proportions. I had already set in motion a plan that would not only secure what was mine but also dismantle the lives of those who had chosen to revel in my humiliation. And as I disappeared into the night, leaving a trail of unanswered questions and shattered expectations behind, I silently vowed that every laugh, every cheer, every toast in my honor would soon be repaid in full, and they would learn that betrayal, when met with the quiet force of calculated retribution, would always come back to haunt its authors. I vanished into the night without so much as a farewell, leaving behind a trail of unanswered messages and a stunned silence that echoed through every corner of my former life. In the immediate aftermath of that birthday betrayal, when I stepped out of the restaurant with my head held high and my promise of retribution burning in my chest, I knew that the world would soon believe I had been defeated, a husband discarded, a man left behind by a heart that had chosen another. Instead, I chose to disappear completely, retreating into a world of shadows and quiet determination, where no texts, No calls, and no frantic pleas could reach me. Behind closed doors, in the solitude of my private study, I set my plan into motion with a calm, methodical precision that contrasted starkly with the chaotic spectacle my wife and her newfound lover had orchestrated publicly. I had always prided myself on my financial discipline, a quality that Sophia had dismissed as boring and unromantic, and now that very discipline became the cornerstone of my silent revenge. Over the span of just a few days, I initiated a series of actions that would ensure my survival and her eventual downfall. I began by freezing our joint accounts, transferring every dollar into separate holdings where only I had access, thereby safeguarding the money I had painstakingly earned and built into the foundation of our business. Every transfer was executed with surgical precision, a quiet act of defiance that left no trace for her to follow. Meanwhile, I rerouted all business dealings exclusively into my name, a process that required countless hours of backroom negotiations, delicate conversations with our trusted advisors, and the meticulous reorganization of financial records that had been maintained for years. It was a process that was as exhausting as it was liberating. Each signature, each document sealed the fate of the empire we had once shared, and every step I took deepened the quiet satisfaction of knowing that I was now the sole guardian of my own destiny. As I worked, I could almost hear the echoes of my wife's laughter from that ill-fated birthday, the sound of her dismissive tone now serving as fuel for my relentless drive. I spent nights poring over bank statements and legal documents, a solitary figure illuminated by the cold glow of my computer screen, my mind focused on one goal: to ensure that while Sophia reveled in her perceived victory with Daniel, the foundation she had taken for granted would crumble beneath her. The brilliance of my financial strategy was matched only by the subtle cruelty of my timing. I allowed her to bask in the honeymoon phase of her new affair, unaware that every moment she celebrated was the moment when I was orchestrating her downfall. Friends and family, who had once seen me as a broken man, began to whisper in hushed tones about the sudden disappearance of the husband they thought they knew, not realizing that my absence was a calculated retreat, an opportunity to rebuild from the ashes and secure every asset that was rightfully mine. I never made a public scene. There were no tearful outbursts or dramatic declarations. Instead, I let my silence speak volumes. I made sure that every transaction was done quietly, without fanfare, and every asset was locked away in my name alone, so that when the truth eventually emerged, it would be as undeniable as it was devastating. I monitored the progress of my financial maneuvers with a detached sense of purpose, reviewing each step with the satisfaction of a man who knew that his meticulous planning would soon leave my former life in ruins. While Sophia and Daniel were busy flaunting their newfound freedom and basking in the applause of a manipulated social circle, I was hard at work ensuring that they would soon find themselves without a stable ground beneath them. The irony of it all was almost poetic. The very qualities she had ridiculed in me, my prudence, my attention to detail, my unwavering commitment to safeguarding what we had built, were now the instruments of her downfall. Every minute that I spent in my silent disappearance was a minute spent constructing a fortress around my assets and my future, a fortress that would stand impenetrable even as her empire collapsed under the weight of its own deceit. And so, as the days passed with no sign of my return, the world began to believe that I had been defeated, that I was a broken man left behind by the whims of an unfaithful wife. Yet, in the quiet darkness behind closed doors, I was remaking my life piece by piece, preparing for the inevitable moment when the truth would surface, and every person who had laughed at my humiliation would be forced to confront the reality that the man they thought they had seen fall was in fact rising. A silent avenger whose every move was calculated and every decision was a step toward reclaiming not only what was mine but also my dignity, my future, and the unassailable truth that betrayal, when met with quiet resolve and relentless discipline, ultimately leads to a downfall that is as complete as it is irreversible. I spent weeks meticulously gathering information, not only on her but also on him, leaving no stone unturned in my quiet crusade for retribution. Every day, as I sat in the solitude of my study, surrounded by piles of financial reports and legal documents, I reviewed every transaction, every whispered conversation, every meeting that hinted at deception. My focus was unwavering. I knew that the truth had to be revealed, and every piece of evidence was another domino set to fall in this intricate game of betrayal. Sophia had always flaunted her lavish lifestyle, a lifestyle that, unbeknownst to her, I had been funding for years, while Daniel, her new partner, paraded as a sophisticated investment consultant. Yet, beneath the veneer of charm and success, I was privy to the truth. Daniel's entire career was nothing more than a house of cards, built on shady dealings and inflated returns that would soon come crashing down. Late nights found me making anonymous calls to the SEC, each call carefully worded to tip off the authorities without leaving a trace back to me, ensuring that Daniel's fraudulent schemes would be scrutinized under the harsh light of regulation. As the days turned into weeks, the first tremors of his impending downfall began to surface. His accounts were flagged for fraud, and whispers of financial irregularities started circulating among the investors. I watched with quiet satisfaction as the well-oiled machine of his deceptive career began to sputter, knowing that every fraudulent transaction was another link in the chain of his imminent collapse. Meanwhile, the lavish lifestyle that Sophia so arrogantly enjoyed was beginning to crumble under the weight of reality. I had always prided myself on my financial discipline, a trait she ridiculed as boring and unromantic, but now it was my greatest weapon. With a few calculated moves, I froze our joint accounts, transferring every dollar into separate holdings where only I held the keys, a move that would ensure her access to funds evaporated almost overnight. I then rerouted all business dealings so that every major transaction was now in my name alone, a process that took countless hours of careful planning and silent negotiation. Slowly, the foundations of her opulent world began to shake. Her credit cards were declined at upscale boutiques where she once shopped with abandon, and the luxury apartment they had moved into, a place that I had been quietly funding behind the scenes, was abruptly terminated when I pulled the lease and redirected the payments. Even our joint car, once a symbol of our shared success, was repossessed, leaving her stranded without the trappings of the life she so desperately tried to maintain. I recall one night when I received a text from Rachel, a message that confirmed what I had already known. The message read, "Sophia just called me, freaking out, says she doesn't understand what's happening. She asked me if you're okay." I couldn't help but laugh quietly to myself. She still clung to the image of me as the helpless victim, unaware that the real power now lay in my hands. Not yet, I thought, as the pieces of her crumbling empire continued to fall into place. I made sure to document every detail, every financial misstep, and every secret meeting, knowing that in time, the accumulated evidence would force the authorities to act. The anonymous calls I made to the SEC were just the beginning. Soon enough, Daniel's accounts would be under intense scrutiny, and the regulatory bodies would be compelled to investigate his shady practices. I spent countless hours poring over financial statements, connecting the dots between his inflated returns and the unauthorized transactions that painted a picture of deliberate fraud. Every discrepancy was noted and cross-referenced, every dubious entry a silent testament to the recklessness of his schemes. It was a slow, methodical process, one that required patience and a steely resolve, but I never wavered. I knew that as each domino fell, the chain reaction would become unstoppable. In the background of all this financial maneuvering, Sophia's world was unraveling too. The expensive dinners, the designer clothes, the seemingly endless stream of luxuries, all were paid for by me, and now I had withdrawn that support with surgical precision. I watched as the calls to her credit cards were declined, as the luxury apartment she had flaunted on social media was suddenly no longer an option, and as the joint assets that had once symbolized our shared life were methodically stripped away. Each step was calculated to leave her with nothing, to force her to confront the reality that she had traded everything for a fleeting fantasy. And then, as if on cue, the final domino began its fall. The evidence I had gathered was complete, a damning record of betrayal that would soon be impossible to ignore. I could sense that the authorities were closing in, that Daniel's career, built on nothing but illusions, was about to be exposed to the harsh light of justice. The whispers among the investors turned into murmurs of scandal, and soon his fraudulent dealings would become the talk of the business world. As I sat in my study, Reviewing yet another batch of documents that confirmed the extent of their deception, I allowed myself a moment to reflect on the irony of it all. They had been so blinded by their newfound passion, so enamored with the idea of starting over without consequences, that they had not noticed the ground crumbling beneath them. I smiled to myself, knowing that the slow, relentless march of justice was finally catching up with them. With every asset I secured, every account I froze, every secret call I made to the SEC, I was building a future that belonged entirely to me. A future free from the ruins of betrayal and the weight of a life built on lies. And as the dominoes continued to fall, I felt a quiet, unyielding satisfaction that would only grow stronger with each passing day, until the inevitable collapse of their entire empire became an undeniable reality. I began to notice the shift in the atmosphere long before I even heard the first official headline. It was in the hushed tones at private dinners and the sideways glances exchanged in boardrooms. Public perception, I knew, was everything, and while Sophia and Daniel paraded their supposed triumph with a confidence that bordered on arrogance, I maintained my silence, letting the world construct its own narrative without my interference. I had friends in the right places, trusted allies who understood the intricacies of our business and the truth behind the facade, and I quietly reached out to them, seeding information that would eventually ignite a social avalanche. One evening, as I reviewed yet another set of financial documents that confirmed every unethical transaction and every moment of deceit, I made the decision to leak a recording that I had obtained. A recording of Daniel, in a moment of careless arrogance, trash-talking his own clients. In that recording, he dismissed the concerns of those who had placed their hard-earned money in his care. His words filled with contempt and a complete disregard for the trust that had been so freely given. It was a candid, unguarded moment that exposed the cracks in his carefully constructed persona as an investment consultant. By the time the morning came, whispers had turned into murmurs and murmurs into roars. His biggest investors began to pull out, each one citing the recording as a wake-up call to the rampant fraud underlying his career. Lawsuits soon followed, and within days, his once sterling reputation was in tatters. At the same time, I began to plant whispers about Sophia. I had always known that her extravagant lifestyle was built on a foundation of deception and unsustainable excess, and I exploited every opportunity to let the truth slip out in the corridors of our shared social circles. The same group of people who had cheered and celebrated her public declaration of betrayal now found themselves whispering about her behind closed doors. They talked about how she had shamelessly cheated with my best friend, how her extravagant spending had left her financially exposed, and how, in chasing after empty promises of love and success, she had lost everything overnight. I made sure that the whispers grew louder, spreading from one influential socialite to another, until the once admired figure of Sophia became synonymous with disgrace rather than romance. Within a matter of days, those whispers had become full-blown headlines. Stories splashed across society pages and business journals alike, painting a portrait of a woman who had traded loyalty for ambition, a woman whose name was now linked to scandal and financial ruin. Invitations to charity events, exclusive business gatherings, and elite social circles, which had once been Sophia's playground, began to dry up as her reputation crumbled. The very people who had once admired her were now distancing themselves, shunning her presence in favor of maintaining their own image of respectability. I watched with a detached satisfaction as the tide turned, knowing that public perception was now firmly on my side. In every whispered conversation, in every knowing glance exchanged at a gala, I could see the recognition that the woman who had once seemed untouchable was now nothing more than a cautionary tale, a living example of what happens when one betrays the trust of those who matter most. I attended a few of these events incognito, blending into the background as I observed the shift. At a high-end charity gala that I once knew Sophia would have dominated, I saw influential figures whispering about her scandalous downfall. A prominent investor, one whose opinion carried weight in our business world, murmured to a colleague that she was just another woman chasing money, a remark that hung in the air like an omen. The irony was palpable. The very celebration of her betrayal had become the beginning of her isolation. In my interactions with mutual acquaintances, I was careful to let my words confirm what everyone already suspected. I made subtle, pointed comments about the importance of integrity and financial discipline, qualities that I had long embodied but that she had arrogantly dismissed as unimportant. Over time, I noticed that even the press began to frame her story in terms that were damning and irreversible. Her face, once a symbol of glamour and confidence, was now regularly shown on screens alongside phrases like fallen star and corporate cautionary tale. The social avalanche was complete, and as I observed the ripple effects of the scandal from the safety of my well-earned position, I felt a quiet vindication. I knew that every whispered word and every damning headline served not only as public retribution for her betrayal, but also as a personal reaffirmation that I had never been the victim in this twisted narrative. Instead, I had been the one orchestrating the long game, a game in which every move was calculated to ensure that those who had once ridiculed me for my careful, disciplined approach would now have to face the consequences of their own hubris. And so, while Sophia and Daniel continued to try and salvage what remained of their crumbling alliance, I watched from afar, my heart steady with the knowledge that the truth was finally out. The social circles that had once celebrated her triumph now shunned her, and the world, in its relentless pursuit of justice, had rendered her nothing more than a cautionary tale, a stark reminder that in the intricate dance of power and trust, the one who plays by the rules always wins. I remember the first time I saw her outside in the pouring rain, her once impeccable appearance reduced to a disheveled mess that spoke of desperation and regret. It was one of those moments when the harshness of reality struck with full force. She stood at my doorstep, trembling in a drenched designer dress that now looked crumpled and cheap, her makeup smeared by tears and the relentless downpour. I could see the stark contrast between the woman I once knew and the shell of her former self. The cold rain mingled with the bitter taste of consequences as she hesitated at the threshold, her eyes searching mine for any sign of mercy. "John," she whispered, her voice barely audible over the patter of the rain, trembling with a mix of fear and longing. I had already made my decision, and as I opened the door just enough for her to see inside without inviting her in, I could feel the weight of every past transgression, every moment of betrayal that had led to this final act. I stood there, expressionless and resolute, letting her see only the steely determination that had defined my every move since that fateful birthday betrayal. "You made your choice," I said simply, my tone cool and unyielding, each word measured and void of any trace of the empathy she so desperately sought. She clutched my arm with a pleading desperation, as if trying to anchor herself to a remnant of the life we once shared, her eyes glistening with tears that carried the story of regret and lost opportunities. "I was stupid," she continued, voice cracking. I lost everything. Please, I miss you. I need you." The rawness of her plea, the vulnerability in her tone, was in stark contrast to the confident, defiant woman who had once orchestrated our mutual downfall. I took a step back, gently removing her hand from my arm without a word, signaling that there would be no second chances. The rain fell heavier, as if nature itself was weeping for the ruin of what we had been, and she sank to her knees on the cold, wet pavement, sobbing uncontrollably. Every sound in that moment, the drumming of the rain, the distant hum of city life, and the quiet sniffles of her sorrow, melded together into a somber symphony of consequence. I watched as her pride crumbled into dust, each tear a testament to the recklessness of her choices and the irreversible damage done to our lives. In that silence, I could feel the long months of careful planning and calculated moves converge into this singular moment of undeniable truth. She had traded our shared future for a fleeting fantasy, and now, the cost was laid bare for all to see. My heart, once heavy with grief and betrayal, had since hardened into a quiet resolve, a resolve that told me that sometimes the greatest form of retribution is not in the loud condemnation of a broken heart, but in the silent, unyielding assertion of control over one's own destiny. As she remained there, soaked to the bone and shivering in the cold, her whispered pleas filled the air, a story of betrayal, of calculated retribution, and ultimately, of the uncompromising assertion of my own destiny over the ruins of what we once called love. The next chapter of my life unfolded with a bitter finality that left little room for sentimentality, a period that I now refer to as the epilogue. In the weeks following the collapse of everything Sophia had once taken for granted, I began to witness the full consequences of her choices ripple outward, reshaping not only her world, but also the world around me. It was as if the very fabric of our shared past had been irreparably torn apart, leaving behind a stark landscape where the ruins of her former empire lay exposed and vulnerable. I learned that Sophia had moved into a rundown motel, a pitiful and crumbling structure that stood in sharp contrast to the lavish lifestyle she had once flaunted. The motel, with its peeling paint and flickering neon sign, became the sole physical manifestation of her shattered dreams, a constant reminder that the woman who had once commanded attention with effortless grace was now relegated to the margins, abandoned by those who once cheered for her. Meanwhile, Daniel, the man who had once been both her confidant and my so-called best friend, had disappeared without a trace, leaving behind a trail of unanswered questions and a legacy of deceit that no longer held any power. His sudden exit from the scene was as abrupt as it was mysterious. One day he was embroiled in scandal, and the next, he was nowhere to be found, perhaps fleeing the inevitable repercussions of his fraudulent dealings, or maybe simply choosing to vanish into the shadows where his lies could no longer be scrutinized. As for my own business, I was steadily reclaiming the strength that had been undermined by her betrayal. The company that we had once built together, which had been tarnished by scandal and mismanagement under her reckless leadership, now began to rise from the ashes. I took deliberate, calculated steps to restructure and rebrand our enterprise, and as the months passed, our reputation recovered with an almost surgical precision. Clients who had once questioned the integrity of our operations now returned with renewed trust, and investors, impressed by the swift, decisive measures I had implemented, were eager to reaffirm their support. It was a transformation that not only restored the financial health of the company, but also reestablished the core values of discipline, transparency, and accountability that had always been my guiding principles. It was in the midst of this resurgence that I attended a high-profile charity gala, an event that I had once known to be a stage for Sophia's dazzling charm and calculated influence. That night, I arrived accompanied by someone new, a remarkable woman named Alexis, whose genuine warmth and intelligence provided a stark contrast to the bitter, calculated machinations that had defined my recent past. As I entered the opulent venue, I felt a mixture of pride and melancholy, a quiet satisfaction at having reclaimed control over my life, mingled with the lingering pain of betrayal that still haunted the corners of my memory. The gala, with its glittering chandeliers and elegantly dressed guests, was abuzz with whispered conversations and subtle glances. I noticed that among the crowd, a solitary figure lingered near a window, her expression downcast and filled with a resigned sorrow. It was Sophia, standing outside the glittering celebration, her presence an unwelcome reminder of a past that had been forcefully erased by the relentless march of time and consequence. Our eyes met briefly across the room, and in that charged moment, I raised my glass, a silent, piercing gesture that conveyed both the triumph of my recovery and the certainty that she would come to regret every choice she had made. There was no need for words. The look in my eyes, the quiet confidence in my posture, and the unyielding calm that had become my trademark were all that was required to speak volumes. The laughter, the music, and the gentle clamor of celebration filled the air, yet for me, the gala was less a night of merriment and more a fitting epilogue, a final chapter in a story defined by betrayal, resilience, and the hard-earned reclamation of dignity. I mingled with the guests, exchanged sincere pleasantries with business partners who admired the turnaround, and even shared quiet, knowing smiles with those who had silently supported my journey from the very beginning. Every interaction was laced with the unspoken truth that while Sophia had fallen from grace, I had not only survived the storm but had emerged stronger, wiser, and more in command of my destiny than ever before. As the night drew to a close and the last of the celebratory music faded into a gentle murmur, I found myself stepping outside into the cool night air, leaving behind the glitter and superficiality of the gala. The city lights shimmered in the distance, offering a quiet promise of endless possibilities. I took a final look back, where Sophia stood alone, an uninvited, unwelcome ghost of a life that had once been. With a calm, determined smile, I walked away, knowing that the final chapter had been written not in the bitter tones of regret, but in the resolute cadence of a man who had turned betrayal into the foundation for a new beginning. In that silent departure, I vowed that I would never again allow the actions of others to dictate the course of my life. For in the art of moving on, true power is found in the courage to build something better from the ashes of the past. I had long anticipated that the final move would arrive like a silent reckoning, inevitable and unstoppable, a moment when every carefully laid plan would converge into a single, irrevocable act of reclaiming what was rightfully mine. On that cool morning, as I stepped into the office that I had meticulously secured over the past few months, I felt a steady calm wash over me, as if the universe itself acknowledged the justice of my calculated retribution. I sat down at my desk, surrounded by the tangible proof of my quiet, relentless work, and prepared to execute the final step in my carefully orchestrated plan. I had already restructured our entire business, safeguarded every asset, and ensured that all joint accounts and critical contracts were now solely in my name. Every detail had been set in motion. Every transaction, every legal document, had been recorded in the annals of our shared history to serve as irrefutable evidence of my silent diligence. Now, with the weight of months of planning behind me, it was time to make the final move, a decisive action that would seal the fate of the shattered remnants of our life together. I opened my email and saw a message from our legal team confirming that all transfers were complete, that the assets were now fully under my control. The words on the screen were clinical, devoid of sentiment, yet each letter was a resounding affirmation that the battle was over. I felt no triumph in their sterile declarations. Instead, I felt the quiet satisfaction of a man who had reclaimed not only his wealth but his dignity. With deliberate calm, I drafted a final memo to all our business partners and stakeholders, outlining the new management structure and reiterating the commitment to transparency, integrity, and continued growth. A message that left no ambiguity about where the power now resided. I sent the memo and leaned back in my chair, allowing myself a brief moment to reflect on the tumultuous journey that had led me here. I recalled the bitter taste of betrayal on my 40th birthday, the searing humiliation as Sophia proclaimed her new beginning with Daniel, and the ensuing chaos that had engulfed our personal and professional lives. I remembered how I had vanished into the night, determined to rebuild everything piece by piece, using the very traits she had scorned in me, my unwavering financial discipline and my steadfast commitment to detail. Every late night spent poring over bank statements, every discreet phone call to regulatory agencies, every carefully executed transfer of assets had been a silent promise that I would not be defeated by her treachery. Now, as the new day began and the final memo set the stage for a future free from her manipulations, I felt an overwhelming sense of finality. The final move was not merely a legal maneuver. It was the culmination of my efforts to transform the wreckage of our shattered marriage and business into a foundation for a new beginning. I thought about the faces of those who had once laughed at my humiliation, my own family, my once trusted colleagues, and even Daniel, whose arrogance had blinded him to the house of cards he had built on lies. In that moment, their laughter and disbelief were transformed into a distant echo, overshadowed by the certainty of my victory. The memo had already started to circulate, and soon, every partner and investor would know that the empire we had built was no longer in the hands of a duplicitous woman chasing empty fantasies. I closed my eyes for a moment and allowed myself to feel the cool, unyielding satisfaction of knowing that I had not only protected what was mine, but had also ensured that the truth would stand unchallenged. There was a bittersweet quality to this victory, a realization that while I had reclaimed my assets and reasserted control, the price of betrayal had been steep, and the scars of the past would never fully fade. Yet, as I opened my eyes and looked out over the city from my office window, I could see the horizon filled with endless possibility, a future defined by my own unyielding strength and the promise of a new beginning. In that reflective silence, I drafted one final email, a personal note to my closest allies, thanking them for their support during the long months of rebuilding and reaffirming my commitment to a future built on honesty, resilience, and unshakable determination. That email, sent with the quiet finality of a man who had walked through fire and emerged unscathed, was the last move in a game that had been rigged against me from the start. As I pressed send and watched the message vanish into the digital ether, I knew that the final move had been made. A move that left no room for regret, no possibility for reconciliation, and no chance for the ghosts of betrayal to haunt my future. I stood up, stretched, and with a final glance at the documents that chronicled my silent victory, I turned away from the past, ready to embrace a future that was mine alone. A future that would never again be defined by the echoes of a birthday betrayal or the hollow laughter of a broken promise. I sat alone in my new office that late afternoon, the last vestiges of a stormy past scattered like ash across my polished desk. The city stretched before me, a glittering tapestry of possibilities that now belonged solely to me. I had reached what I believed was the ultimate move in a long, bitter game of betrayal and retribution. With every calculated step, every meticulously planned maneuver, I had transformed my personal ruin into an empire built on truth and unwavering discipline. Now, as I gazed out over the urban sprawl, I felt the weight of every moment, the cold call on my birthday, the silent disappearance that followed, the relentless gathering of evidence, the orchestrated public fallout, and the final execution of all my plans, converge into a singular, defining point in my life. This final move, this culmination of years of painstaking strategy, was not simply about reclaiming what I had lost. It was about redefining who I was and the future I would command. I recalled the journey vividly, the shock of that fateful phone call, when Sophia's voice had dripped with smug satisfaction as she declared her newfound love for Daniel had ignited a fire in me. Instead of crumbling under humiliation, I had chosen to vanish into the night, to work silently behind closed doors, transforming my pain into a relentless drive to protect and rebuild my world. Every move I made was deliberate, a series of precise financial maneuvers that severed our joint assets, rerouted every critical transaction into my name alone, and established a fortress of legal documentation that would, in time, render her every claim null and void. I had methodically collected every scrap of evidence, every record of unauthorized transactions, and every whisper of deceit, knowing that the truth, once exposed, would be as unforgiving as it was absolute. And now, as the public fallout had left her isolated and exposed, I stood as the sole guardian of our once shared legacy, a legacy that had been tarnished by her reckless ambition but now restored by my unwavering resolve. The final chapter of this tumultuous saga had been written not in a blaze of angry confrontations or tearful recriminations, but in the quiet, methodical execution of a plan that spanned months of sleepless nights and relentless determination. I remember the moment I received the confirmation email, "Emily's bankruptcy has been finalized," and felt not a surge of triumphal glee, but a profound, measured relief. It was the quiet assurance that justice, in its own unyielding way, had caught up with those who had chosen to betray our trust. I had rebuilt the business from the wreckage, ensuring that every client, every investor, every partner now saw the truth of my leadership. A leadership that was defined by integrity, discipline, and the ability to weather even the most bitter of storms. In that reflective silence, I pinned one final email to my closest allies. A simple message of thanks and affirmation that the future I had fought so hard to secure was now undeniably mine. Every word was laced with the quiet strength of a man who had not only survived a storm of betrayal, but had used that very tempest to forge a new beginning. I recalled the faces of those who had once laughed at my humiliation, the family members whose expressions turned from amusement to disbelief, the best friend who smirked as if daring me to respond, and now, in the mirror of their regret, I saw the reflection of a man who had reclaimed his dignity. There was no bitterness left, only a steadfast clarity that resonated with every decision I had made. I rose from my desk, feeling the soft hum of the city as a reminder that life, with all its turbulence and unpredictability, continues unabated. With each step I took towards the window, I reflected on the irony of it all. While Sophia had chased a fleeting fantasy with her new partner, I had harnessed my financial discipline and meticulous planning to build a future where betrayal held no sway over my destiny. The final move, I realized, was not in the public spectacle of scandal or the cold, hard legal victories, but in the quiet, personal triumph of reclaiming control, of refusing to be defined by the echoes of a broken promise or the hollow laughter of those who once celebrated my downfall. As the sun dipped lower on the horizon, casting long shadows over the city and painting the sky in hues of redemption, I felt a serene resolve settle over me. I whispered softly to myself, "Goodbye, Sophia," not as a bitter taunt, but as an acknowledgement that some chapters must end before new ones can begin. In that moment, I knew that I had made my final move, a move that left no room for reconciliation, only for the promise of a future built on truth, resilience, and the unassailable power of self-determination. And as I turned away from the window, stepping out into the cool embrace of the evening, I carried with me the quiet assurance that my life, now redefined and untethered from the past, was finally mine to command.